Number 17. Samantha Granado. While responding to a complaint in Crystal Lake, Illinois late one night in 2022, police came face-to-face with 30-year-old Samantha Granado, who was accused of spitting in a woman's face and hitting her in the head with a cell phone. According to a criminal complaint, Granado injured an officer by digging her nail into his skin and kicked another officer as the cops attempted to subdue her. She also allegedly shoved an officer while resisting arrest and refusing to be handcuffed. Granado was charged with 2 felony counts of resisting a peace officer causing injury and misdemeanor counts for battery and resisting a peace officer. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 16. Edward Saman. Officer Frank Tonkovich was conducting a routine traffic stop in Naperville, Illinois one morning in 2022 when a car with no involvement in the situation pulled up. Bodycam footage showed a man exiting the vehicle and charging at the officer from just feet away with a hatchet in his hand. Left with no other choice, Tonkovich responded with gunfire and shot the suspect, striking him 5 times. Later identified as 28-year-old Edward Saman, the man died from his injuries. In the wake of the tragedy, Saman's brother told ABC7 that he couldn't offer an explanation for what had happened. He apologized to everyone involved on his brother's behalf. No charges were filed against Tonkovich, who described Saman as having a crazed look in his eyes. In a statement announcing the decision, the state's attorney's office commended Tonkovich for his handling of the situation, which included his efforts to aid Saman after making the split-second decision to shoot him. Number 15. Kman Mar. As the 4th of July holiday approached in 2017, police in Long Beach, California received a complaint about a person obstructing an intersection and jumping on cars. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, an officer arrived at the scene to find 22-year-old Kman Mar waving her hands in the air and yelling at drivers. The officer initially tried to de-escalate the situation, but the young woman was in no mood for a peaceful conversation. Bystander Leonard Grant Jr., who filmed a viral clip of the encounter, told the Long Beach Post that a nearby motorist tried to intervene by talking to Mar, but it only caused tensions to escalate. As the responding officer tried to detain Mar, she allegedly resisted, forcing him to use his baton in his attempts to subdue her. A struggle ensued as the officer wrestled the combative suspect to the ground, with help from a Good Samaritan who stepped in to help. Mar was taken into custody with help from backup officers. Upon seeing footage of the incident, many members of the public praised the officer for not immediately resorting to the use of a taser or a gun in his efforts to get Mar under control. Mar was charged with 1 felony count of resisting an executive officer and 3 misdemeanor counts of resisting, delaying, or obstructing a peace officer. Number 14. Rory Susan Woods. Authorities in Long Meadow, Massachusetts, were enforcing an eviction order on a $1.5 million home bright and early one morning in October 2022 when an SUV pulled up to the property. A woman later identified as 55-year-old Rory Susan Woods exited the vehicle and turned her attention towards some homemade beehives being towed by the SUV. She began trying to open the lids on the hives in an attempt to release the bees on the team carrying out the eviction. Dressed in a beekeeper's suit, Woods allegedly carried a beehive toward the front door of the home while purposely agitating the bees. According to police, she smashed the lid of a beehive and flipped another off the flatbed that was carrying it, causing the bees to go into a frenzy. By the time a sheriff's deputy tried to stop Woods, it was too late, and the raging insects had already started stinging people at the scene. Woods was not the owner of the 22-room home, according to authorities. The house had sat at the center of a court battle for 2 years before the eviction was finally green-lighted, and Woods felt personally compelled to protest. But her actions were far from admirable, according to Sheriff Nick Kochi, who accused the woman of putting lives in danger with the attempted weaponized bee attack. One person ended up in the hospital, and he was reportedly lucky to survive. Prosecutors charged Woods with 4 counts of assault and battery by means of a dangerous weapon, 3 counts of assault by means of a dangerous weapon, and disorderly conduct. Number 13. Francisco Severo Torres. A United Airlines flight from Los Angeles to Boston was less than an hour away from its destination on March 5, 2023, when an alarm notified the crew that an emergency exit had been tampered with. Someone had moved the door's handle from the fully locked position into the disarmed position. A flight attendant recalled seeing 33-year-old Francisco Severo Torres near the exit shortly before the alarm went off. When confronted about his suspected activity, Torres asked a crew member if there were any cameras that had recorded the accused act. The flight attendant told the captain that they believed Torres posed a threat to everyone on the plane and that he needed to land the aircraft as soon as possible. Two other flight attendants were keeping an eye on the emergency door a little while later when Torres allegedly charged at one of them with a broken metal spoon and struck the employee 3 times in the neck. Passengers and crew members subdued the crazed passenger, who was promptly arrested upon the plane's arrival to Boston. Witnesses told investigators that Torres had asked someone where the door's handle was shown on the flight safety card during the safety briefing prior to takeoff. Cell phone footage captured by a passenger appeared to show the suspect saying he was waiting for them to point the gun at me so I can show everybody that I won't die, and they're going to have to shoot me down today. Torres also threatened to kill everyone on the plane and identified himself as Balthazar, the son of Dracula. During police questioning, Torres allegedly said that he wouldn't die if someone shot or stabbed him and that he had the ability to come back to life. He was accused of assaulting a jail guard shortly after being taken into custody. Federal authorities charged Torres with 1 count of interference and attempted interference, which could carry a sentence of up to life in prison if convicted. A few months after his arrest, a judge ruled that he was incompetent to stand trial based on the findings of a mental health evaluation. During the same hearing, the judge denied the defendant's request to be released so he could investigate what he described as a conspiracy, which he blamed for his behavior on the plane. Torres insisted he was competent to move forward with the case, but his defense attorney requested that he be kept in the mental facility where he's been housed since early on in the case. Court records show that he has a history of both police run-ins and time spent in mental health facilities. A grand jury indicted Torres on the charge in September 2023. For now, the case remains at a standstill while the court waits to see if the suspect's mental health can be restored to competency. Number 12. Crystal Denim. The questions surrounding the circumstances that led to 33-year-old Crystal Denim's arrest begin with the fact that she loaned an adult toy to her cousin, Michael Barton, who also happened to be her neighbor. It's something most people would never do, no matter how close they are with their family. But Crystal wanted the item back, and she asked Barton about it when he stopped by her house in Corbin, Kentucky one evening in October 2021. The two got into an argument, and Denim ordered Barton to leave her property. Things went from 0 to 100 when Barton allegedly grabbed Crystal's elbow, prompting her to respond by grabbing a kitchen knife and stabbing him. Barton left the property and Crystal dialed 911 to report the incident. She was calmly sweeping her porch when police arrived. Crystal told responding officers that she didn't think she even drew blood. Meanwhile, Barton declined medical assistance for cuts to his arm and back. He confirmed that he and Denim argued over the borrowed toy and told police he left when the suspect began acting crazy. When an officer told Denim she was under arrest, she allegedly began yelling and walking toward them in a fighting stance with her hand balled into a fist. The officer quickly got the situation under control and booked the suspect into custody on charges of felony assault and misdemeanor counts of menacing, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. She was sentenced to a year in jail. Number 11. Joseph David Emerson. During what began as an uneventful flight from Everett, Washington to San Francisco in October 2022, off-duty Alaska Airlines pilot Joseph David Emerson suddenly began to act out of character. The 44-year-old was sitting in the cockpit jump seat when he suddenly said, "I'm not okay," and allegedly tried pulling 2 handles which would have activated the plane's emergency fire response system and automatically cut power to the engines. Thankfully, the captain and first officer sprang into action without hesitation and stopped the system from being activated. Emerson calmly complied with their orders to go to the back of the plane before approaching a flight attendant and saying, "You need to cut me off right now, or it's going to be bad." He also allegedly said, "I messed everything up," and admitted that he had tried to kill everybody. Meanwhile, the flight diverted to Portland, Oregon for an emergency landing. During police questioning, Emerson said he had taken psychedelic mushrooms about 2 days earlier. He said it was his first time using the drug and that he thought he was in a dream and wanted to wake up. Emerson further revealed that he had been struggling with depression for about 6 months leading up to the incident and that he went 40 hours without sleep before boarding the flight. The rogue pilot is facing 83 counts of attempted murder, one for every person on the plane except himself, and 1 count of endangering an aircraft. News of the arrest shocked his loved ones, friends, and neighbors, who described Emerson as a kind and friendly person who was well liked within his community. In response to questions about why Emerson wasn't subjected to a more rigorous pre-flight security screening, an airline spokesperson claimed that he had not shown any signs of impairment prior to the flight. Lawyers representing several passengers in a lawsuit argued otherwise, claiming that Emerson's ailing mental state would have been noticed if he had been screened appropriately. The lawsuits and criminal case against Emerson are ongoing. Number 10. Brent Ellison's. Maine State Trooper Sean Porter was conducting a routine traffic stop in the town of China in September 2021 when a man who had nothing to do with the situation pulled over and confronted him. The suspect, Brent Ellison's, already had a lengthy history of hostile run-ins with the cops. When Porter tried arresting him for obstructing government administration, Ellison's allegedly kicked the cop in the chest, bit another trooper, and threw another kick at a third cop. He was also accused of driving a short distance with Porter in his window. Ellison's was charged with assault on an officer, reckless conduct with a dangerous weapon, obstructing government administration, refusing to submit to arrest or detention, and driving to endanger. When he announced his plans to act as his own attorney in August 2023, the judge ordered him to undergo a mental evaluation first to establish that he's competent, triggering a courtroom outburst by the accused. Before being led away, Ellison's accused court officials of living in luxury at the expense of commoners and called them all trash. The judge's order came on the heels of a previous order to undergo a mental evaluation back in 2022. Ellison's only partially completed the evaluation before filing a lawsuit against the state, accusing the examiner of making up stories about him and trying to frame him as delusional so he would be imprisoned in a mental hospital as a political prisoner. The lawsuit was dismissed. Ellison's history of law enforcement dates back more than a decade. While living in Oklahoma in 2017, he worked as a paid FBI informant and testified against Jerry Varnell, who was accused of planning to bomb a building. Several years earlier, in 2011, Ellison's had been sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for making a bomb threat. The arrangement between Ellison's and the FBI began after he was locked up for violating his probation. Ellison's also has prior convictions for harassment, violating protective orders, and making threats. At least 3 women sought restraining orders against him during his time living in Oklahoma, including one victim who claimed that he had called her 263 times in a day, and another who accused Ellison's of threatening to kill her. After his most recent order to undergo a mental evaluation, Ellison's went before the judge and basically said that psychiatry was a junk science. His current case appears to be ongoing as he pours all his effort into fighting the system. Number 9. David Trones. Tragedy struck the upscale Orlando, Florida neighborhood of Delaney Park in April 2018 when David Trones called 911 and claimed he came home to find his wife, Shanti Cooper, dead in the bathtub. Responding officers immediately noticed that the 39-year-old body was covered in injuries that couldn't be explained by an accident. Shanti had clearly been beaten and strangled with such force that her attacker had cracked her skull. David was suspiciously unfazed by his wife's violent death, immediately making him a person of interest in the case. But he denied any involvement in the murder, and authorities lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him, so he was allowed to walk free while an investigation was carried out. Detectives quickly discovered that David and Shanti's marriage was plagued by problems. When the two met online 5 years earlier in 2013, Shanti was under the impression that David was a millionaire who had inherited family money. She moved from Minnesota to Florida to live with him, and 2 years later David bought an old house that was desperately in need of repairs. David paid $600,000 cash for the house. All costs fell on Shanti's shoulders after that, even though she was never added to the deed. From Shanti's previous understanding, David didn't need to work because he was rich. But she began to suspect that her husband was broke when she found herself covering all the household expenses. After dumping $250,000 into the home renovation project, the house was still far from finished. It was unlivable, and Shanti was sick of footing the bill. She began staying in a separate apartment on the property, while David slept on a sofa in the garage, and the project ground to a halt. Hoping to increase the home's value, David made plans for the home to appear on the reality show Zombie House Flippers. Shanti initially agreed to the idea, but she got angry and stormed off during a meeting with the show's producers. Just days later, she was dead. Prosecutors charged David with first-degree murder and accused him of killing his wife in a fit of rage during an argument about the failed home renovations and Shanti's refusal to go on the TV show. They also claimed that Shanti had possibly been planning to leave David in the time leading up to her death. David's defense attorney argued that he was incompetent to stand trial due to a schizophrenia diagnosis, but the judge ruled otherwise, and the case moved forward. The 55-year-old was found guilty by a jury in 2023 and received an automatic life sentence without parole. Number 8. Tobias Roman. A 27-year-old California man who went by the street name Giggles was already facing serious criminal charges when he went before a judge in a Bakersfield courtroom in 2012. In the original case, Tobias Roman was accused of stalking and threatening a woman who was working a kiosk at a local plaza. The victim accused Roman of repeatedly walking past her over a several-hour period while threatening to kill her and eventually pointing a knife at her. After being booked into custody on suspicion of attempted robbery, making terroristic threats, exhibiting a deadly weapon and stalking, Roman was arraigned by Judge Charles R. Bremer. The hearing immediately got off to a bad start, with Roman ignoring the judge's orders to stand up out of his chair. He said his foot hurt, but he eventually complied. When Bremer asked Roman his name, the young man immediately copped an attitude, stating, "Tobias, my first name. That's it. Giggles or Tobias. Don't call me nothing else." He interrupted the judge as the charges were being read out loud, saying that it was all lies. Bremer told Roman to be quiet, and he responded by saying, "Yeah, you need to be quiet." As the defendant continued talking out of turn, the judge ordered for him to be taken away. Before leaving the courtroom, Roman turned around and very explicitly threatened to kill Bremer. After advising law enforcement to take appropriate action against Roman, Bremer recused himself from the case. Roman was hit with an additional charge for threatening a public official. He pleaded no contest to 2 separate threatening charges, one from his original arrest and one for his courtroom behavior, and was sentenced to 3 years and 8 months in prison. Number 7. Britney Reynolds. In early 2023, a topless and barefoot North Dakota woman entered a Catholic church and destroyed a statue of Jesus. The incident occurred at St. Mary's Cathedral in downtown Fargo, where 35-year-old Britney Reynolds was allegedly caught on camera as she entered the building and knocked over a potted plant. She then ripped a large Jesus statue off the wall and smashed it against the floor, causing an estimated $11,500 worth of damage. Officers responding to the church's 911 call saw Reynolds running across the street as they arrived at the scene. They quickly caught up with her and arrested her on suspicion of felony criminal mischief. According to a police report, Reynolds was unable to answer basic questions and appeared to be under the influence of narcotics. The suspect had a long list of prior convictions, including disorderly conduct, resisting police, drunk driving, assault, shoplifting, and providing false information to law enforcement. Shortly after Reynolds' arrest, a warrant was issued against her for allegedly becoming combative toward emergency room staff at a Cass County hospital. The statue-smashing incident came 2 years after another suspect spray-painted one of the church's statues. Despite this, a diocese spokesperson told Valley News Live that they want the church to be open and available to visitors at all times. He also said that he prays for the people who commit these acts of vandalism and hopes that they get the help they need. Number 6. Jesse Charles Smith. Late one night in September 2023, a thief hotwired a large excavator in Gainesville, Florida, and crashed it into several buildings, including a Walmart store and a structure housing storage units. He also took out several power poles. By the time the joyride was over, the suspect had caused an estimated $2 million in damages. The suspect, later identified as 47-year-old Jesse Charles Smith, allegedly entered the store with a machete in hand. According to police, he ditched the weapon before officers tracked him down and arrested him on suspicion of grand theft, resisting without violence, armed trespass, and damaging property. During his initial court appearance, Smith was brought before the judge in a special suit meant to restrict his movement. A spokesperson for the Alachua County Sheriff's Office said that the defendant was under close supervision due to concerns regarding his mental health. Smith reportedly has a long rap sheet, which includes multiple thefts he was accused of committing in 2018. On at least 2 occasions, he allegedly stole power drills from a Lowe's home store by throwing them over the fence of the store's garden center, then retrieving them from the parking lot after he exited the store. A loss prevention officer accused Smith of driving straight at him when he went outside to confront the suspect. By then, Smith had already served at least 3 stints in jail. He ended up serving a year in prison for the string of thefts involving the power drills. According to the most recent updates on the stolen excavator case, a judge ordered him to undergo a mental evaluation before he's willing to consider setting bail. Number 5. George Demarius. 43-year-old Trent Goodmiller was entering a McDonald's restaurant in Bismarck, North Dakota during his work break one day in October 2023 when a stranger asked him to buy a Happy Meal and a Big Mac for them. Goodmiller told the man to get a job as he walked past and got in line to place his order. While he waited, the man approached him and removed a gun from his waistband while telling Goodmiller that he was disrespectful. Later identified as 33-year-old George Demarius, the suspect hurled a few profanity-laden insults, shoved the gun back in his waistband, and left the restaurant. Maybe Demarius was broke, hungry, and desperate, although the circumstances regarding why he asked a stranger to pay for his food are unclear. But nothing justifies pointing a gun at someone, especially in a crowded restaurant filled with innocent customers and families. Goodmiller later described feeling scared for both his own safety and the safety of bystanders during the incident. He reported the encounter to the police, who found a gun in the suspect's possession and viewed surveillance footage to corroborate the incident. Officers reportedly had to point their gun at Demarius while taking him into custody. He was charged with 1 felony count of terrorizing with a dangerous weapon. Demarius's partner, 27-year-old Eloise Flyingby, was charged with 1 misdemeanor count of giving the police a fake name, which she pleaded guilty to and served 10 days in jail for. Number 4. Miles Joseph Friedrich. 54-year-old Dr. Talat Jahan Khan was sitting at a picnic table near her home in Conroe, Texas one day in 2023 after recently relocating to the area from Seattle. Out of nowhere, a stranger later identified as 24-year-old Miles Joseph Friedrich walked up to the pediatrician and began stabbing her in broad daylight for no apparent reason. He stopped to take Khan's pulse before resuming the unprovoked attack, plunging the blade into the victim's body until she died. Several people witnessed the murder, including Matthew Amador, who told local station KTRK that he came outside wielding a sword and spooked the suspect. Amador described Friedrich as having a blank and evil look in his eyes. Around the same time Amador went outside, 17 other neighbors emerged from their homes with guns. By the time officers arrived, the suspect had fled the scene. He was located nearby amid an intensive search and was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. Friedrich remains behind bars on a $500,000 bond. According to police, his motive for committing the horrific act remains a mystery. Khan's family told police they didn't recognize her attacker and that the two didn't know each other. A local food delivery driver told KTRK that Friedrich was homeless and lived under a bridge near Khan's apartment complex. He said that the suspect often became upset when his employer refused to give out free food. The judge overseeing the case has ordered a mental evaluation of the defendant and has set the next court hearing for December 2023. Number 3. Marcus O'Brien. An argument between two Long Island, New York residents in November 2023 took a viciously violent turn, leaving one man with a partially severed ear. The disagreement happened between 35-year-old Marcus O'Brien and his 53-year-old roommate at their shared home in Baldwin, where O'Brien allegedly lost his temper and physically attacked the victim. He stands accused of stabbing the victim with a kitchen knife, trying to strangle him, and biting off a chunk of his ear. According to police, the victim fought back, causing O'Brien to drop the knife. The suspect proceeded to wrap his hands around the victim's neck and chomp down on the man's ear. Luckily, the victim managed to escape. He ran to a neighbor who dialed 911, and O'Brien was arrested. Both men were taken to the emergency room, where the victim was hospitalized with deep lacerations to his shoulder and arm. While being escorted out of the hospital, O'Brien allegedly tried to attack the police, leaving one officer with injuries that required treatment. He was charged with multiple counts of assault, attempted assault, criminal possession of a weapon, menacing, criminal obstruction of breathing, circulation, criminal mischief, harassment, and obstructing governmental administration. Number 2. Linda Phan. In late 2017, an Arizona man called the police and reported his wife of 32 years for shooting at him while he was sitting on the toilet. According to court records, 69-year-old Linda Phan and her husband had been fighting for several days when the disagreement reached its breaking point on the day before New Year's Eve. The victim accused Phan of angrily barging into the bathroom and shooting at his head twice, prompting him to run outside with his cell phone and dial 911. Luckily, he wasn't hit by the gunfire. When responding officers arrived, Phan reassured them that she had put the gun back into a drawer and cooperated during her arrest. She reportedly told police that she never planned to shoot her husband, but admitted to firing the 2 shots above his head to make him listen to her. According to law enforcement, Phan argued that her husband would have to be 10 feet tall in order to end up in the path of her bullets. Investigators disagreed, instead concluding that the bullets missed the victim's head by about 7 inches. Phan was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and disorderly conduct with a weapon. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Anisha Speed. After hanging out with 19-year-old Anisha Speed one day in 2019, a young man invited her to hang out some more at his apartment in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Shortly after arriving, Speed asked the man for intimacy. He declined, and she responded by pulling a gun and repeating her demand, and threatening to shoot him if he didn't cooperate. The victim grabbed Speed's wrist as she fired a round, which he luckily managed to avoid being struck by. In an attempt to escape further gunfire, the man jumped off his second-floor balcony. He was waiting down the street when the police arrived and told responding officers that he heard the gun going off a second time as he fled the scene. Inside the apartment, police found a spent .40 caliber shell casing and a live round. Speed allegedly resisted being handcuffed and was taken to the ground by officers, who found her in possession of a stolen shotgun and a PlayStation console she had taken from the victim's home. She was also in possession of a spent .40 caliber shell casing, which she admitted to taking from the scene because she feared that it had her DNA on it. Authorities originally charged Speed with attempted murder, theft of a firearm, resisting an officer, illegal discharge of a firearm, and obstruction tampering with evidence. She took a deal and pleaded guilty to a felony weapons charge in exchange for getting all other counts dropped, and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. The judge also offered her to take an effective decision-making course and pay $800 in court fines. Number 20. Fake robbery backfires. In 2014, Australian YouTubers Daniel Marin, Robert Malazzo and George Prostus thought it would be a good idea to stage a fake robbery. Their target was an ATM in Sydney. The group of friends filmed themselves pretending to rob each other, with one of the men posing as a thief while his friend pretended to use an ATM at a shopping centre. The two then started to wrestle on the floor, attracting the attention of a witness passing by who quickly rushed over to help. The witness punched one of the men in the face and actually broke his nose. The footage first popped up on the YouTube channel Reckless Youth about a decade ago. It resurfaced again in 2023 after it was discovered by Barstool Sports. During the chaos of the fake encounter, one of the friends could be heard on the video yelling that it was just a prank, but it was already too late for the injured man, whose nose was spewing a river of blood. One of the YouTubers said later on that the group performed the prank as a social experiment to see if people would step in to stop a robbery, but the video got a lot more negative feedback than they were expecting, with many viewers saying that the concept was dumb. Others took satisfaction in seeing one of the men get his nose broken for the stupid stunt. All things considered, the outcome of the situation could have been way worse. In February 2021, another YouTuber named Timothy Wilkes and his friend pranked a small group of strangers in Nashville, Tennessee, by pretending to rob them. The prank was made even worse considering the men confronted the strangers at knife point. With the camera rolling, the pair walked up to the targets outside of an indoor trampoline park with butcher knives in their hands. This was a terrible idea for so many obvious reasons, and it wasn't necessarily surprising when a member of the group shot Wilkes with a gun. The 20-year-old died from his injuries, and the man who fired the weapon, 23-year-old David Starnes Jr., clarified that he was not in on the prank and had no idea the robbery was set up. Starnes was not charged for the shooting, which was deemed completely justified under the state's self-defense laws. YouTube banned dangerous and harmful pranks 2 years before the death of Wilkes. Fake robberies were specifically included on the list of things that would result in a video being removed from the streaming site. And tragedies like this are a reminder that the policy exists for good reason. Number 19. Sydney Mour. 22-year-old Jonathan Gilbert, or Tyler Lane, got caught up in a so-called lover's quarrel back in 2023 after getting close with a woman named Kaylee Morgan. Gilbert's ex-boyfriend, 18-year-old Sydney Mour, allegedly grew jealous of Gilbert's new connection. While visiting a family friend in Spalding County, Georgia in July of that year, a trio of suspects egged the house Gilbert and Morgan were staying in. Authorities later identified the pranksters as Sydney, 18-year-old Jeremy Munson, and 19-year-old Mackenzie Davenport. Gilbert went outside to face off with the vandals, who quickly ran back to their car. He chased after them and was shot multiple times by one of the people inside the vehicle as he approached the car. Morgan told News Station later in an interview that Gilbert collapsed and was begging for his life. Someone then stole a necklace holding the ashes of the young man's deceased father, and the suspects left the scene. Officers got there and found Gilbert dead in the middle of the street. Mour, Munson, and Davenport are all facing multiple charges, including malice murder, battery, and criminal trespass. According to police, Sydney was the one who fired the gunshots, while Jeremy ripped Gilbert's necklace straight off his neck. The pair are facing additional charges of aggravated assault and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony on top of the others. Number 18. TikTok pranksters picks the wrong victim. A TikTok creator named Jay, who goes by the username JKindaFunny8, is well known for his elaborate pranks, which often involve sneaking up behind strangers with a megaphone and shouting the word Monano. According to one source, this word means morning eater, while others say that it's not even a real word. In early 2022, Jay quietly approached a large man from behind and tried to carry out one of these pranks, but it didn't exactly go as planned. Before he knew it, the target had the content creator on the floor in a headlock before he could even get a word out. Jay could be heard on video insisting it was a prank, and thankfully nothing too serious seems to have come of the situation. The footage went viral, receiving divided reactions on whether or not the stranger overreacted, or if he gave Jay a well-deserved taste of his own medicine. Number 17. Deadly Ding Dong Ditch. A game of Ding Dong Ditch proved fatal for a Florida teen back in 2003 after knocking on the wrong man's door. In what initially seemed like a harmless prank, Mark Drews and his friends spent their Friday night knocking on a couple of neighbors' doors on Boca Raton and then mischievously running away. One homeowner, 40-year-old J. Stephen Levin, mistook the 6'2" teenager as a burglar and answered the door with a gun in his hand. He shot at Drews, who collapsed while running away and died later on that night at a hospital. Levin told police officers that it looked like Drews had something in his hand when he knocked and that he reacted out of the belief that it was a weapon. The tragedy left community members and Floridians divided on whether or not Levin acted within his rights under the state's Stand Your Ground law. Friends, family members, and other supporters of Drews' family wanted to see charges against Levin and were angry when the investigation dragged on longer than they thought it should have without any arrests. It was later revealed that Drews was shot in the back, showing that he wasn't posing a threat to Levin at the time of the shooting. Prosecutors ultimately decided to move forward with a manslaughter charge against Levin, who pleaded guilty in exchange for a 10-year probation sentence. He also agreed to complete 1,250 hours of community service. For the first year of his probation, Levin went to jail every Saturday and Sunday from 8:00 a.m. to 4 p.m. He decided to contribute $2.50 per week toward a scholarship fund in Drews' honor and was required to sincerely and publicly take responsibility for his actions. The Drews family was extremely upset when Levin tried to put an end to his probation early in 2009, after serving just 5 years. Speaking with the Palm Beach Post, Mark Drews said that Levin expressed remorse to the family in court and then seemed to take it back completely during a civil trial just 3 years later, saying that he never meant a word of his original apology. Prosecutors claimed that the Drews specifically agreed with the clause in Levin's plea agreement about being able to end his probation early if he satisfied every clause. But Mark Drews claimed he was unaware of the stipulation until Levin actually put in the application to end his supervision. Much to the family's dismay, a judge granted the early termination and Levin was free. Number 16. The Great Blue Hill Eruption. An April Fool's prank that took place in Milton, Massachusetts worked a bit too well when it caused hundreds of people to panic about a possible volcanic eruption in the area. It all started with a fake news broadcast by local station WNAC-TV, which claimed that the nearby Great Blue Hill had started spewing lava and flames. Standing at around 635 feet tall, the Great Blue Hill is located 10 miles outside Boston, near the towns of Milton, Randolph, and Canton. It's the tallest point in all of Norfolk County. The prank report said that the erupting hill was spraying ash onto nearby homes and properties. In reality, the Great Blue Hill isn't even volcanic. Created by Boston TV news producer Homer Silly, the report contained fake warnings from then-President Jimmy Carter and then-Governor Edward King, made from spliced clips of a past speech. It included images of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which had happened just a few days earlier. Reporter Jan Harrison said that the Blue Hill disaster was caused by a chain of geological reactions resulting from the Mount St. Helens eruption in Washington state. At the end of the broadcast, Harrison held up a small sign that said April Fools. But by then, many local residents had already gone into panic mode and had stopped watching the TV, not noticing the sign. People began to flee their homes while dozens of calls flooded into local police stations and the Massachusetts Department of Civil Defense. After realizing the report was a prank, dozens of angry civilians called WNAC. The station apologized later that night during its 11 p.m. late-night news broadcast. Homer Silly was fired the next day for failing to exercise good news judgment and for violating the Federal Communications Commission's policy against showing shocking footage without informing the audience beforehand. Number 15. Timmy Hill. In the summer of 2014, after a late-night swim, two teenage boys thought it would be funny to throw their soaking wet underwear onto a West Virginia state trooper's parked cruiser. 18-year-old Timmy Hill was there with the other two young men that night, but didn't participate in the underwear prank. The commotion from the boys laughing awoke Trooper B.D. Gillespie's wife, who in turn notified her husband of the situation. Determined to catch and punish the pranksters, Gillespie quickly put on his uniform, called his work to report that he was going on duty, and went driving around in search of the mischievous trio. He eventually managed to track the teens down nearby and got into a scuffle with Hill, who was allegedly being uncooperative outside the young man's house in Mercer County. Gillespie pepper-sprayed Hill during the fight, hit him in the head with a service baton, and shot him twice, killing him right there at the scene. A grand jury declined to press charges against Gillespie after determining that he acted reasonably with deadly force, even though Hill was unarmed at the time of the fatal encounter. It was later revealed that Gillespie and Hill had a long, troubled history, which started over Gillespie's disapproval of Hill riding his four-wheeler around their quiet neighborhood. According to a lawsuit filed by Hill's family, Gillespie frequently watched the teen using binoculars and a radar gun. The trooper also allegedly filmed Hill at one point with a camcorder. In the lawsuit, the Hill family accused Gillespie of making multiple unwarranted house calls, warning them to keep Timmy's behavior in check, and that he had the law on his side if anything were to happen. The allegations are enough to make you wonder if Gillespie had it out for Hill. All legal matters around the tragedy have since been settled, but questions regarding the events leading up to the shooting continue to linger. Unfortunately, nobody will know the exact details of what went down that fateful night. Number 14. Nark Galley. In September 2013, during a deadly encounter that's been described by investigators as unintended and extremely tragic, 18-year-old Pramila Lal was killed by a family friend at a house in Longmont, Colorado. Lal and her family had recently moved out of the home where the crime took place and were having 21-year-old Nark Galley watch the property for them. Galley was playing some video games with Pramila's younger brother one night when they started hearing movement within the home. As far as the two young men knew, they were the only ones in the house, or at least the only people who were supposed to be there. Afraid that an intruder was inside, Galley quickly grabbed his gun, gave a weapon to Pramila's brother, and began searching for the unwelcome visitor. Little did either of the men know, Pramila and her cousin had quietly snuck into the house to play a prank on them. When Pramila jumped out from a closet to scare Galley, he was armed and ready to shoot. He pulled the trigger before even realizing that it was the teen playing a harmless joke. Pramila passed away thanks to her injuries, and Galley was charged with reckless endangerment and a few other counts, including a gun charge. Authorities acknowledged that Galley didn't actually mean to kill Pramila, but they went back and forth on whether or not the shooting constituted a homicide. Galley was never charged with killing Pramila and seems to have squared away his legal issues. Number 13. Toilet paper tragedy. One night in 2010, when 34-year-old Alabama firefighter James Luther McRae noticed a few teens lurking in his yard, he thought they were trying to break into the home. After realizing that they'd been spotted, the teens got into a car and drove away. McRae dialed 911 and reported the incident while chasing after the kids in his own truck. He tried getting close enough to the teen's car to get the license plate number, but accidentally lost control of his truck, overcorrected, and crashed into a nearby fence. The truck then rolled over, and McRae, who wasn't wearing his seatbelt, was ejected from the vehicle. He died from his injuries. Investigators traced the incident to a group of 3 teenage girls and a young man. The high schoolers worked with law enforcement and explained that they were toilet papering the homes of 2 of McRae's neighbors as part of their senior prank. They didn't mean for anyone to get hurt because of their actions. Escambia County Sheriff Grover Smith told AL.com that the area had a long-standing tradition of toilet papering and other pranks among high school seniors close to graduation. After McRae's death, he announced the implementation of a zero-tolerance policy toward these pranks in the future. Smith said that he wasn't trying to put youngsters in jail, but that things had to change now that a man needlessly lost his life by trying to protect his home and family. Number 12. Susan Tammy Hudson. A 52-year-old Tennessee woman named Susan Tammy Hudson thought it would be funny to convince her sister Helen that she killed her husband as an April Fool's prank back in 2013. She told Helen that she fatally shot the unfortunate victim and that she had to clean up the mess. Hudson suggested that she and her sister bury her husband's body in the nearby town of Blackwater, which straddles the Tennessee-Virginia border. But it was no laughing matter when police showed up at the woman's house after getting a report from a relative about the alleged murder. Hudson was quickly taken into custody, but she managed to avoid getting arrested after proving that her husband was actually alive and well, and that she had no real intentions to harm or kill him. After the misunderstanding was settled, Hudson told local news station WKPT 19 that she should be careful about the types of jokes she plays on gullible relatives in the future. But she praised the local police department for their quick response and cited their appearance as an impressive display of the agency's effectiveness. Thankfully, nobody was hurt as a result of the prank, which came just days after a young woman from Wagner County, Oklahoma, named Tori Wheeler, told her boyfriend that she was pregnant. It wasn't true, and Wheeler's partner, Derek Bauer, didn't think it was very funny. In fact, he was pretty upset about it, and Wheeler allegedly responded to the reaction by threatening the man with a knife. Bauer then dialed 911, at which point Wheeler flew into a rage and cut his throat. Luckily, he survived, and according to police, Wheeler admitted to the violent confrontation. While Bauer was given stitches for his wounds, Wheeler was charged with assault. Number 11. The prank that nearly started a war. Back in 1986, an Israeli intelligence analyst played an April Fool's prank by spreading a false report that an assassination attempt was made on Lebanese Shiite Muslim leader Nabi Berri. According to the bogus report, Berri had been seriously wounded. It was sent out to several government officials and a state-owned radio station, which broadcasted the report to a wider audience in both Israeli and English. The hoax was not only distasteful, it caused increased tensions in a region that was already plagued by poor relations between multiple countries. After realizing the report was fake, the Israeli military scrambled to take back the news and make sure people knew it wasn't true. It especially didn't help that Berri's supporters saw Israel as untrustworthy and shrouded in conspiracies. Thankfully, action was taken fast enough to stop the fake news from cycling even further, sparing tensions in the Middle East from flaring too out of control. The officer behind the prank was sentenced to just 35 days detention. Number 10. Adrien Broadway. In early 2014, a group of teenagers in Little Rock, Arkansas, decided to take revenge against a fellow high schooler who pulled a prank against them on Halloween a few months before. They went to the target's home and covered a vehicle that was parked in the driveway with toilet paper, eggs, and even mayonnaise. As the group left the property, a man came running out of the house with a gun and opened fire on the teens. One of the bullets struck a young girl named Adrien Broadway in the head. She was killed by her injuries, and one of her friends survived after getting hit in the arm. Authorities charged the shooter, 48-year-old Willie Noble, with first-degree murder, committing a terroristic act, and 5 counts of aggravated assault. Noble told police officers that he wasn't aiming at anyone in particular and that he didn't mean to actually shoot and hurt anyone. His intention was to simply scare the teens, and he claimed that he was pointing the gun up while he shot. Arkansas doesn't have a stand-your-ground law similar to those in Texas and Florida, which gives property owners a lot of wiggle room for being able to legally shoot trespassers. The state's law does give leeway to homeowners who defend the perimeter of their home in certain cases, leaving many afraid that Noble might be able to get out of the murder charge. But that never actually happened. A jury found Noble guilty, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison with eligibility for parole after serving 21 years. He'll become officially eligible for parole in October 2036. Number 9. Nicholas Bell. When their family homes were too overcrowded during Thanksgiving in 2010, buddies Jeffrey Charbonneau and Nicholas Bell decided to stay at a friend's house in Manchester, Vermont. Something went terribly wrong, though, resulting in a 911 call from Bell claiming that he accidentally shot Charbonneau in the chest with what he thought was a simple BB gun. According to several reports, Bell planned to prank Charbonneau by shooting the gun to wake him up. But the weapon wasn't just a BB gun. It was a loaded .22 caliber rifle, and a bullet struck Charbonneau fatally in the chest. He was just 24 years old at the time of his death. Someone familiar with the incident disputed claims about the tragedy being a prank gone wrong, but confirmed that Bell mistook the rifle for a BB gun and was examining the weapon when it accidentally went off. Either way, it was agreed upon by law enforcement that the young man didn't mean to kill Charbonneau, and that Bell's lack of experience with guns likely contributed to the shooting. But Bell still had to answer for his actions, so the 23-year-old was charged with manslaughter, assault with a weapon, and reckless endangerment. He pleaded no contest to every count. Bell was sentenced to serve 1 year in prison and also received a 7-year suspended sentence, which meant he would serve 1 year and remain free for the rest of his sentence as long as he followed the rules set by the court. He cried and apologized profusely at the sentencing hearing, but the victim's family wasn't ready to forgive yet. They urged the judge to impose the maximum prison sentence and were disappointed by what seemed like a slap on the wrist to Bell for taking a human life. The judge acknowledged that the family's frustrations were all valid, but noted that the law punishes accidental deaths differently than those that are caused on purpose. And in the absence of intent, the conviction and sentence were well in line with what the law called for. The punishment was also based on Bell being unlikely to reoffend and his lack of a need for rehabilitation. Number 8. Honoring the Boston Strangler. Albert DeSalvo, or the Boston Strangler, brutally killed at least 13 women in and around Boston between the years 1962 and 1964. He was also a serial attacker who was imprisoned for life in 1967 after assaulting multiple women. While in prison, DeSalvo confessed to the Boston Strangler murders, but he was never convicted for any of the crimes. His guilt remains a large topic of speculation and debate even to this day, although DNA evidence has linked him to at least one of the deaths. Many who knew DeSalvo personally didn't think he would ever be capable of murder, even though he wasn't exactly the sweet and innocent type. Either way, he went down in history as the Boston Strangler. In 1973, DeSalvo was stabbed and killed in prison at the age of 42. Back in 1971, Texas State Representative Tom Mour, Jr. introduced a proposition to commend Albert DeSalvo as an upstanding citizen who unselfishly served his country, his state, and his community. Moore sponsored the proposal mainly as an April Fool's Day prank because he knew his colleagues often passed bills and resolutions without actually reading them thoroughly. The text described DeSalvo as a compassionate gentleman who enabled the weak and the lonely throughout the nation to achieve and maintain a new degree of concern for their future. Specifically, the resolution commended the killer for his innovative population control and applied psychology techniques. Just as Moore expected, the resolution to honor DeSalvo passed without issue. He withdrew it before it could be put through, and he explained that he pulled the prank to make a point about how state lawmakers often passed legislation without reading it or properly researching topics. The stunt may have not looked that great to the public, but it wasn't surprising to many who are familiar with how the process of passing law works. As Snopes founder David Mickelson said, "It's usually expected that lawmakers will rubber stamp a proposed resolution honoring a person as a gesture of goodwill to their colleague who introduced it." But Moore made a point by highlighting the need for legislators to be better when it comes to doing due diligence. Number 7. Danny Crawford. One night back in 2006, a teenager named Danny Crawford and two of his friends passed the time by throwing eggs at passing vehicles in Columbus, Ohio. But Michael Gross and his son Michael Jr. didn't think it was very funny when eggs splattered against the outside of their Jeep Cherokee. Gross got out of the car and chased away the teens, and at some point he even began firing. Crawford died at the scene from a single gunshot. Police impounded the Jeep shortly after the crime, but it wasn't until months later that they discovered the gun that was used in the shooting under the vehicle's hood. An arrest finally came about 4 years after Crawford's death in 2010, when Gross was officially charged with murder and tampering with evidence. He took a plea deal at the 11th hour to avoid a trial and admitted to everything. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, which Crawford's family didn't think was long enough. They were also very upset that the case didn't go to trial like they'd hoped, and that the plea deal was sprung on them. Danny Crawford's mother, Nancy, told local news station WPNS that the desire for Gross to get the maximum sentence wasn't rooted in hate. In fact, she said they'd forgiven Gross for taking Danny's life, and that she hoped her family would get to a place of healing where they could think about Danny without having to think about the graphic circumstances surrounding his death. Number 6. Richard Nixon radio prank. On April Fool's Day 1992, National Public Radio announced during its Talk of the Nation program that Richard Nixon had plans to run for president. Richard Nixon resigned in 1974 to avoid getting impeached over the infamous Watergate scandal. In short, the scandal involved numerous illegal and unethical activities committed by members of the Nixon administration, including bugging the offices of several political opponents and harassing activists. These activities were publicized after after 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic Party's national headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. It opened up a floodgate in terms of exposing the shady undertakings that had been carried out under Nixon's watch, and his efforts to downplay the scandal failed completely. Nobody ever imagined that Nixon would try to run for president again, and he didn't, but many certainly thought he was planning on it when they heard the fake April Fool's broadcast. During the announcement, the show played a clip of what sounded like Nixon saying, "I never did anything wrong and I won't do it again." It was then followed by a seemingly serious analysis of Nixon's decision to run for president and how it may potentially affect the race. Listeners were shocked, to say the least. Calls flooded into NPR from people eager to express their disapproval. By the time host John Hockenberry announced during the second half of the show that the announcement was a prank and that an impersonator was behind Nixon's voice, thousands of people had already fallen for it. They were most likely relieved to find out that it was a prank and that they could call off any plans to protest. Number 5. Randy Lee Tenley. In a bizarre bid to stir reports of Bigfoot sightings, 44-year-old Randy Lee Tenley put on a costume of the mythical creature one night back in 2012 and creepily walked along Highway 93 in Kalispell, Montana. Authorities later said that alcohol may have been a factor in Tenley's choice of activities. The prank went horribly wrong, though, when Tenley was hit by a car and was left helplessly lying in the road, where he was eventually hit by another vehicle. He died from his injuries, and the 2 teenage drivers who crashed into him were left traumatized. Montana State Trooper Jim Schneider told the Daily Interlake that he had never seen a case like this happen before. In his words, "You can't make it up." He went on to explain that the type of costume Tenley was wearing, known as a ghillie suit, is made to resemble thick foliage. It's often used to camouflage military snipers and would have made it pretty difficult for drivers to see him until they had little to no time to avoid him. Number 4. Peter Wade. In July 1982, while drinking alcohol and smoking pot along some railroad tracks in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, a group of teenagers decided it would be fun to derail a train. After waiting for an oncoming passenger train to pass, Peter Benton and Peter Wade threw the nearby switch. The train came hurtling along at 60 miles per hour and quickly flew off the rails. It crashed into a pasta factory nearby, turning the locomotive and 5 passenger cars into a mangled mess of metal. At the time, there were only 5 passengers and 2 members of the crew on the train. They all luckily survived with minor injuries, but the engineer, 50-year-old Jack Duffy, was crushed to death. The teens left the scene and learned about Duffy's death not long after. 5 suspects were arrested in connection to the horrific prank, and Wade and Benton were among the 3 who faced some of the most serious charges. Wade pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was ordered to serve up to 5 years behind bars. Benton and a 3rd defendant, Randy Lee Gelb, were given the same sentence. Wade was released at the age of 20 after serving about 22 months. He went on to make $1 million a year as a successful stock analyst on Wall Street. On the outside, he had turned his life around, but the guilt he felt over his crime slowly ate away at him, and in the early 2000s he decided to shift gears and pursue a filmmaking career. His debut film, Tracks, tells his story as a wayward teen who set his path straight after a tragedy. When Jack Duffy's surviving loved ones learned about the movie, they were understandably upset. To them, it seemed like Wade was capitalizing on their loved one's death, and they felt the storyline sent the wrong message. That a teenager can do something horrific, resulting in the loss of a human life, and still go on to be wildly successful. During interviews about the movie, Wade referred to the derailment as the accident, causing many to wonder if he had really come to terms with his role in the destructively deliberate act. He also hesitated to describe the act as premeditated, instead saying that it was a split-second decision that he made at the urging of another member of the group. Number 3. The Left-Handed Whopper. One of the most famous April Fool's Day pranks came in 1998 when Burger King published a full-page ad in USA Today promoting a left-handed Whopper. It claimed to have the same ingredients and condiments as the original Whopper, but had all condiments rotated 180 degrees to stop lettuce and other toppings from spilling out of the burger. The ad had a quote from Burger King's Senior Vice President for Marketing, Jim Watkins, describing the sandwich as the ultimate have it your way for our left-handed customers. It also said that the left-handed Whopper would only be available in the United States, but that the company eventually planned to expand expand its availability to restaurants in other countries with large left-handed populations. Hopefully, you understand the humor behind this campaign without us having to explain that the Whopper's condiments are already distributed evenly throughout the burger, and that left-handed diners don't really suffer from a higher tendency for the contents to spill. But many of America's 32 million lefties apparently didn't understand it was a joke, and the restaurant was flooded with thousands of orders for the left-handed Whopper. Other customers requested their own right-handed version of the sandwich. The day after the ad went live, the company revealed that the non-existent burger was an unexpected hit. Burger King clarified that the campaign was simply an April Fool's Day prank and that the Whopper is indeed an ambidextrous sandwich. Number 2. Seth Stone Rock and Derek Greenlee. It's unclear whether Seth Stone Rock and Derek Greenlee knew how dangerous it was to hide a stop sign by wrapping it up in plastic, but that's what they decided to do at an intersection in Circleville, Ohio back in 2011, making the sign extremely difficult to see. Unable to spot the sign, an elderly woman drove straight through the intersection without slowing down or stopping, and was hit by another vehicle. 85-year-old Mary Spangler and her 81-year-old sister, Norma Jean Shea, both died due to their injuries. Investigators soon discovered that Stone Rock and Greenlee had bragged on Facebook about the thoughtless prank. Surveillance footage captured the young men buying cellophane at a local Walmart. Neither of the young men had past criminal records, and they had both recently graduated from high school. Any future plans they may have had were now interrupted with involuntary manslaughter charges. The case against Greenlee was soon dropped after prosecutors decided there wasn't enough evidence against him to move forward. Stone Rock took a plea deal and admitted to 2 counts of reckless homicide in exchange for getting the manslaughter charge dropped, and 1 count of tampering with a traffic control device. Thanks to his history of being an outstanding community member before the prank, he was released from prison after serving just 8 months of a 4-year sentence. Number 1. Jaffa Alien Invasion. On April Fool's Day 2010, the Jordanian newspaper Al-Had published a front-page news article claiming that UFOs landed in the desert near the town of Jaffa. The strange aircraft's pilots were described as 3-meter creatures, and the piece mentioned that the unidentified vehicles caused a massive communications blackout in the area. According to the article, the flying saucers lit up the night sky as they descended toward the Earth. Naturally, Jaffa's residents broke into a panic. Many people ran into the street, while other scared civilians kept their children locked up at home to protect them from the otherworldly visitors. Mayor Mohammed Milihan prepared an evacuation order for the town's 13,000 residents, and he even notified the authorities of his plans. After learning that the whole thing was just a hoax, Milihan was unamused. He admonished the newspaper for terrifying the people of Jaffa and said he was considering suing the publication for its lies. The newspaper apologized for the stunt, but didn't explain why it specifically targeted Jaffa with the prank. According to the BBC, the region is notorious for having military bases which were once used for joint training exercises by the United States Armed Forces and the Jordanian army. The bases were also once occupied by Al-Qaeda militants. After realizing the extent of the panic that was caused, Al-Khad's managing editor, Moussa Barhoume, said that the news report was blown out of proportion. He also explained that the purpose of the prank was to amuse, not scare people. It may seem shocking that even Jaffa's mayor fell for the elaborate hoax, especially if you live in a country where April Fool's Day pranks are more popular, but the tradition isn't common in Jordan, which helps explain why the UFO prank spread like wildfire. The prank was reminiscent of the panic that erupted in the United States during a 1938 radio broadcast known as War of the Worlds. Aired during Halloween over the CBS radio network and narrated by Orson Welles, the series went down in history for causing widespread panic about a possible alien invasion. The series didn't have a large following, and to this day, the scale of the hysteria is heavily disputed. While most versions of the story talk about complete mayhem, evidence suggests that the public's reaction was not quite so dramatic. But the fictional news did generate an overwhelming influx of phone calls, and the studio was flooded by both police officers and reporters. The reaction in Jaffa was arguably much more extreme, especially considering how it almost triggered an evacuation. Luckily, the needless squandering of resources was avoided. Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend a 6-hour flight seated next to a screaming infant, or a heavy drinker who seems extremely agitated and like they might fly into a rage at any moment? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.